Michael J.
So it is Monday, the 1st of June. So we went a little bit off schedule last week and this week because some important announcements were made this week, today actually, around the new companion rule as well as banned and restricted changes in standard and historic.
Yeah, and I mean, effectively, the ripples are going to go even further, but they did start with something, see what the implications of that are. And let's just jump to it. I mean, the new companion rule, I know they explored a variety of options, but the one they ended up settling on is basically just adding a 3 generic. So basically, instead of just playing your companion, just doing it, you actually have this hero power of sorts, this ultimate.
Like a morph,
you can use one.
right?
Sort of. It goes to your hand, though. It's just you pay 3 to draw a card, and the card is this companion from your sideboard. You got to show your opponent the companion and put it in your hand. So it's like you still declare the companion at the beginning, and you can only have the one. It's just that instead of once per game, you can play the companion out of your sideboard. Instead, once per game, you can pay 3 to wish for your companion, where you just get the companion out of your sideboard and put it into your hand. And when you do so, you show your opponent. And you still have to have the condition be true. And it's you can only do it as a sorcery during your main phase when the stack is empty. And it's 3 mana of any color. And you can't like trick bind it or anything. It's a special action like unmorphing.
So, like you said, this has some broad implications, right? So I think that just blanket statement, we saw companions come out fast and furious online when the set came out online, and Lurrus of the Dream Den took over Vintage, for example, right? And it took over Vintage because Black Lotus in your opening hand is already great. It was hyper explosive with Lurrus. And then we saw a ban of that card. With this rule, I mean, I don't know what you think about this. It makes Lurrus was banned in Vintage, but I think that's not even necessary anymore. I don't think companions are going to be very impactful in large formats with this condition anymore.
So I think they haven't actually unbanned Lurrus in Vintage yet, or Lurrus and Zirda in Legacy yet, because I think that they want to have there be a chance for the rules to come in, and they'll probably take them both off the ban list next month or something, you know?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, my reading of the situation was that Lurrus in Vintage and then both Lurrus and Zirda in Legacy were banned because they were just enabling these hyper explosive draws, right?
Well, honestly, other stuff was going to get banned too. They were just the first. It's just like both Zirda and Lurrus are just so busted with Lion's Eye Diamond. And Lion's Eye Diamond, you could be like, well, what if we ban that? It's not just Lion's Eye Diamond. It's everything else, too. There's so many things, right? Like Zirda with Grim Monolith and Basalt Monolith is a whole thing. It was Lion's Eye Diamond, which just helped accelerate the thing because you could sacrifice the Lion's Eye Diamond to get Zirda. Versus Lurrus, you could actually just play the Lion's Eye Diamond out of your graveyard when you're storming off. Both of them were just the first to go. And I think Zirda is definitely going to be broken in Vintage also, if not for this rules change. But there's actually several other companions who are each just going to take a turn being broken.
Yeah?
But they were 3 extra mana, though. That's night and day.
Well,
that's night and day.
I think the bigger implication for most players, I think just because it's the most popular format, is going to be Standard, right? And the impact of companions on Standard. And I think unlike in the really large formats like Vintage and Legacy, where we had like these companions that were so fast, so powerful, you know, before the set was even printed on paper, I think like Standard, like the impact on companions, the impact on deck design is going to vary wildly. I think it's not like, you know, the Vintage/Legacy impacts at all. Like for example, you know, there's companions like Geruda, I think, are this doesn't do very much against that deck. Do you agree?
What do you mean it doesn't do very much against it?
Well,
that's a real hit.
It is a hit, right? So
spending 3 mana and having it stuck in your hand, where now they could actually go after it.
Yes.
Because it's not like you're just spending 9 mana in one turn.
Just self-contained, that Reanimator deck before and after this rule, just relative to itself, it is for sure worse. What I was saying is like relative to the impact on other companions. For example, Obosh, right, in a red aggro deck, was this companion that was kind of standing in for Embercleave and standing in for Torbrand, right? And then like there was some deck design sculpting you had to do to accommodate its condition.
Well, there still is.
But I think like Obosh is going to be far, far worse, right, than it was before this change. Versus I think Garuda.
It costs 3 more mana.
Yeah, in a deck that's often tight, right? The thing is that.
Well, do you think that Obosh is going to see less play than Garuda?
Yeah, I think Garuda is going to rise in popularity. I think Obosh is going to decline in popularity. That's my prediction.
Interesting.
I think like the Reanimator deck was, it was hot right out of the gate, and then it cooled off substantially as, the various Fires decks rose, for example, right? I think like that's a deck and an engine where, 3/4 of its companions are just played in the main deck, and everything is, you could just go on normal speed if you just drew them like regular cards, or you have this ability to do a 3-mana tax but still have a high likelihood of having your access to your card. It's not 100% anymore because
I guess I just don't understand what the reason would be of why the 3 mana for Obosh is so devastating and the 3 mana for Garuda isn't.
Well, to me, because like if you're the red deck, you're like first turn action, second turn like action, third turn, artifact mana, maybe some action, fourth turn explode, or like.
No, you're just describing the curve before when you didn't have to pay 3.
Yeah, now you're
not going to do that the same way.
Draw your Obosh.
But that's true with Garuda. I don't know. I don't mean to just be argumentative. It's just which deck actually has 3 extra mana they don't need more often? The red deck or the Garuda deck?
Well,
doesn't the Garuda deck want to use its mana?
Yes, but I also think that the Garuda deck, because it plays other copies in the main deck, it could just go off on normal speed from the cards that it actually draws, or it can just cast another large threat on that turn and then play attrition and then just like tap 3 mana some later turn, get their guy and go off.
Yeah, I mean, like if one card, like we can't compare the Garuda that's in the main deck to the Obosh that's in the sideboard. If your main deck has Garuda, this rule doesn't change that.
Yeah,
so like whatever, right?
I think maybe I'm not doing a good job of describing what I think. Like I feel like, because I understand what you're saying, I feel like the faster decks, like specifically the Obosh aggro decks, are going to be very damaged by this rule. Or like people are just going to go in a different direction if they want to play red aggro now. Right? They're like, it's not worth it. I'm just going to go back to playing Embercleaves or Torbrands. Does that foot with you at all?
I mean, if that's what you're saying, I don't know. I guess I don't know. Maybe there's also just a lot of other implications to have to try to digest regarding the ban list. I just think that if you're just looking at strictly the companions themselves, it's going to have to be a question of, is this card worth paying 3 mana to get? There's a lot of things that you would pay 0 mana to get, right? But like 3 mana extra, a lot of people might not be in the market for that. I think that Yorion is actually a great example of one of the cards that I think is going to still be great.
So people are going to still make 80 card decks. People are going to still play it. And
dude, I would play 80 cards if you gave me 21 life to start the game. Let alone the ability to just buy a Yorion.
Yeah, so I agree with you. Here's the thing. Well, I don't know about the 21 life thing. But the Yorion, nobody's playing it on turn 5 anyway, right? They need to spend all their mana getting all their 187 permanents lined up to double up. So I don't think this is damaging their curve at all. Like it's fair. maybe a doll is the wrong thing to say. Sometimes they have enough permanents that they want a 187, or sometimes they just have to because they need a blocker. But generally speaking, they're not playing it on turn 5. So this is like, all right, I'll pay 3, whatever. I think you're right.
The implications of this, it really seems like it's giving the other person a chance to react, to like set up, to defend themselves, right? Like you have to make some of the investment, or like for instance, take Yorion. Normally, as soon as they have 5 mana, they just have access to Yorion all of the time, right? Until they use it.
Yeah.
But if you have to pay 3, if you're going to do it in 2 installments, it's like you have to pay part of the investment up front. Now your opponent can be like, uh-oh, now I got to keep the shields up. But you've got nothing to show for that first half of the investment in terms of what's on the table. You know, like, I think it's going to actually make the companions a lot more able to be interacted with. You know, stuff like discard spells, counter spells, plus, like, if they take a turn off to get their Yorion and then you planar cleansing or whatever, you know what I mean? Where you're like, oh, I got to just do it now and blow up all your random stuff you have laying around because I know you would be able to blink it all next turn. I really think that the opening up room for people to react, to do something about it, is like one of the biggest wins of this change.
Yeah, I think like obviously discard is going to get a lot better. It has to, right? Previously, discard didn't do hardly anything against companions. But I think there's also subtle things like Robber of the Rich, right? Gets a little bit better against companions, right? Because they're putting a card into their hand. So, it does let you zero out some card advantage a little bit there. A little bit.
Yeah. No, yeah, it does. I suppose it does. How much do you think people are just going to be playing companions for value versus building their whole deck around it?
I think it depends. Like, so, like if you look at a companion like Lutri, the Spell Chaser, like you had to kind of build your deck to begin with, right? So there's a lot of accommodation as being asked for to play that card at all. I don't think that Lutri is offering nearly enough that you would try to do Lutri for value, despite it just being a value card.
Yeah. I guess I don't even mean what percentage of the companions that exist would you play for value versus build your deck around them, but rather out of the companions that get played, how many of them will just be for value versus building your deck around it, you know?
So
Yorion, you're usually going to play Yorion because your deck is about it, right?
I don't know.
Whereas like Karuga, you'd be more likely to just play it for value.
So I think both Yorion and Karuga are cards that are, you're being asked to do something kind of weird, right? Normally we don't play only casting cost 3 and above. Normally we don't play 80 card constructed decks. But then you get this pretty good body, pretty good card advantage engine. But I don't know that either of those cards, it doesn't seem like a build around to me. Like maybe Yorion has a lot of 187s.
Yeah, Yorion makes you play. So it's not like you just always play Omen of Fire.
Yeah, I guess you're right on that.
Versus Karuga, all you're doing is just like, okay, I guess I have to just cut a couple 2-cost removal spells and that's it. Although I don't know. Now, with the ban list changes as well, maybe a lot of things are going to change there. But I thought it was interesting them pointing out regarding the companion stuff that they were dominating Standard, Pioneer, and Modern, and they've already necessitated bans in Legacy and Vintage. And they didn't even speak to Draft, where companions are completely busted too,
Yeah, they're very good in Draft. I myself had a Zerta the Dawnwaker in my cycling-only deck on Sunday.
Nice life. So what percentage of, we'll call it decks that like top 8 events and stuff, for Standard, what percentage do you think are going to have companions in the next month?
In the next month, I think probably less than half, which is a substantial step down, but still
From the 96, 95%.
I think less than half now.
It's still that's still a good chunk.
Not zero, right? But there are like all kinds of viable strategies that people play that were not companion decks, like, the two different Teamer decks. There's the Teamer Wilderness Reclamation deck, the Teamer Adventures deck, and the Mono Green Stompy deck. Those are all viable decks that didn't play any companions. So I think like decks like that are probably gonna. I think almost by definition they get better in the marketplace. And then I think
plus they're definitely going to anyway from the changes to the ban list, right? Which we haven't got to yet.
Yeah, 1,000,000% yes, right? Although one of the notable companionless decks has just got banned, basically. So
Winota?
Yeah, Winota.
Yeah.
It's funny.
At least in Standard, you can still play it in Pioneer.
It's funny about Winota. I never really appreciated how terrible Winota was, and then last week on just playing Arena, like it was just such a high percentage of Winota, and it is so miserable to play against. But yeah, that deck has generally.
It's not really Winota's fault, though. It's definitely. I mean, don't get me wrong. It's a mana cheat, etc. But it's totally Agent of Treachery that makes it miserable.
Yeah, the thing is, on one level, I don't have a problem with Agent of Treachery. Like, the card costs a ton of mana. If you're going to pay that much for a card, it might as well have a great ability. And we've seen, quote, fair Agent of Treachery succeed, right? Like last year when it came out.
Yeah. I just still think that even when fair Agent of Treachery succeeded, it wasn't fun then either. It was fair. It just wasn't fun.
It wasn't. That kind of stuff's never fun, but it was fair, right? And it was thought-provoking. Winota is just miserable. Like, on the third turn, I have this 4/4 for 4, and I'm attacking you, and sometimes I have a triple confiscate.
Right? But it's still, you would feel the same way if it was show and tell, or if it was sneak attack, right? Like, it's just the Agent of Treachery specifically gets really unfair on the third or fourth turn. Winota randomizes it where you're just getting like huge power spikes uncontrolled, where it's just hopeless when you're playing against it. And then other times it's just nothing. And it doesn't feel like your decisions mattered as much as did they just have Agent of Treacheries on top of their deck or not.
Oh, yeah. One of the things I think that's going to be super beneficial about the banning of Agent of Treachery is just that the determination of who wins based on the player of the draw will even out a little bit as a result of this. But just let's go back to the companions before we talk about those specific cards. So I think I'm not that down on Lurrus in Standard. The reason for that is
I'm not down on Lurrus in Standard either.
Like a lot of the good Lurrus decks, the white weenie-ish deck, the green-white deck, the cycling deck, Lurrus is just he's just hanging out there. He's not central to the strategy. I guess when you're bouncing an Alseid of Life's bounty, then Lurrus is very central to what you're doing. You're just like...
No, I mean, you're just... It's a good combo, but it's not... Your deck isn't, like, relying on...
Yeah, it's just a really good card that fits into your 75, and you didn't have to concede very much to play it. And especially in the case of, like, the white-green or the white-weenie decks, it's on theme with the lifelink. That's all cool. And I think that that'll be fine. The amount that you're rebuying from the cycling deck doesn't go down too much. Yeah, you have to pay a 3-mana tax, but it's not that big of a deal, I think. Because a lot of the things that you're cycling are non-permanents or are cards that you can't cast anyway. So I think, like, that's not that big a deal. Where I think Lurrus has a huge, huge downside is in the black decks. Like, either the decks that are using Lurrus for Mire's Grasp or the decks that are using Lurrus to power up Priest of Forgotten Gods. I think those decks are taking a huge hit from this versus the white ones.
I mean, anybody who wanted to just use Lurrus the same turn, play Lurrus and use it immediately, it is disproportionately hard to do that, particularly if you're trying to do something interactive with Mire's Grasp, if you give your opponent a warning first, In
a turn, basically, right? Because I feel like there's a difference between the decks that are just doing their own thing and trading off cards and then using Lurrus as, like, their backup plan to recoup later in the game, and the ones that are actually using Lurrus central to what they're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and that's a little bit what I was getting at, is I think that this rule actually, it actually, I think, hurts the all-in decks a little bit more than it hurts decks that were just doing the thing for value. Like that's part of the reason why I'm a little skeptical of the claims regarding Obosh. My experience with the red decks has been that you just stay, and particularly if you're playing Obosh and you're just playing enough one drops, you just can be low enough to the ground where you don't always have ways to spend all your mana. And it's like really good to be able to still spend your mana doing something productive.
I can buy that. I feel like
particularly given just how high impact Obosh is, compared to like if you're going to play, picture you're playing a Rakdos aggro deck, drawing a card, and then the card you drew is Lurrus. It's just not as high impact. I think Lurrus is a better card than Obosh in general. But like if you're just playing for value and you just at a point in the game spend 3 mana and draw a Lurrus, then when you drop the Lurrus, it's just another thing, right? But like when you spend a 3 mana and you draw an Obosh, you might just be threatening to win the game. Like it's like such a high impact card to be setting up.
Yeah, so I agree with that. I'm just saying that the thing that I didn't like about the paying 3 mana to get the Obosh into your hand versus some of the other companions is like it really takes away from like the red aggro deck, like the turn 4 or 5 table flip, where you're just like, here we are, take 100, right? Like that's not going to happen on that timetable ever anymore in Standard.
Yeah, they'll be all right. I think these changes are a boon to red aggro.
So, I mean, macro they are because all the people who were into red aggro are getting hurt worse than red aggro.
Right. So, I think it'll be all right.
Speaking of which, yeah, I have a different take on this. I think that some people are thinking like the mutate decks and some of the other like Umori creature decks are really badly hampered by this rule. Like I never felt like Umori was that central to the mutate deck. Just like,
Nah. Yeah, I agree.
It's a dude.
Yeah, it's pretty good, but I mean, like, it's also pretty good to just play with some some sorceries and instants. Just don't play with that companion.
Oh.
Just put some sorceries or instants in your deck. It's not like you needed Umori before; it was good, but
no, it's just a card. It's a good card.
But I mean, yeah, there's also sorceries and instants that are pretty good.
Well, I think that if you could play Adventurer's Impulse in the mutate deck, that might be fantastic. You would have so many more keepable hands because, like, one of the things that's a high indicator of a mulligan in the mutate deck is you just don't have a catalyzing creature. Like, you don't have like a turn 1 or 2 creature to put your mutate onto. Like, all you have is like a handful of like 4 drops, so you have to mulligan. But if you like all of a sudden you just had like Adventurous Impulse, and you're like, all right, I can keep this hand, cast Adventurous Impulse, and maybe I'll end up with a Paradise Druid or a Frog, and then it could be rock and roll on turn 3. Like maybe that's actually better for the mutate deck. Also, I think of the mid game.
Now I think I do think that the free Umori is worth it if you just are allowed to play with it.
Oh yeah, I mean if it's just free.
But this is a net positive for the mutate decks because you having to downgrade your free Umori to actually playing with sorceries and instants, I don't think it's the biggest hit. Like it's a little hit, but it's nowhere near the hit of people who had, linchpins of their deck banned or have to pay 3 more mana for the key card of their deck.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, so I think that if the answer is that deck might not get hurt too badly or that deck might even get better, but Umori isn't part of the equation anymore. Right? That's the thing. So maybe mutate.
It's not a 0.
But Umori
I don't think it's a 0. Yeah, I think that, there's a lot to like about not playing with Umori. But
it's cool. It kind of.
I could imagine playing Umori though. I don't know. It depends. The more you are just like a green ramp deck, the more I kind of would still play Umori.
It kind of reminds me of when Skull Clamp got banned, but then cranial plating just slotted right in. I remember
didn't even miss a beat.
I remember Eugenius won the. I think he won the extended portion of Worlds that year with a deck that was legal in block. It was like literally legal in block. No standard or extended cards in his extended deck. Gotta love it.
Pretty close. What do you think of Fires of Invention Banned, man?
I love The Agent of Treachery ban, I think the Fires of Invention ban is unnecessary. I
Oh,
did
strong
not
disagree.
like it at all.
See, I feel you on how fun the Fires of Invention stuff was until it wasn't. I just think that it eventually got to the spot where it wasn't anymore.
So
it's kind of just busted, man. It's just
okay,
too many Black Lotuses.
A powerful card. It's a very powerful card, no question. The question isn't whether or not it's powerful. The question is whether or not, it rises to the ban question. You and I had a disagreement about this a few weeks ago, where I said I thought that Fires of Invention was like the worst card in the Jeskai Yorion deck, and you're like, no, it's one of the best cards, right? So I think
yes.
I think that we're kind of both right. So if you're playing an aggro deck, Fires of Invention is really fantastic against you, right? But if you're playing the mirror, you usually side Fires of Invention out. It's actually one of the worst cards in the mirror because it basically puts you under a Teferi, right? So you can't react to their stuff. So you don't agree with this? It's just hilarious.
No, it's just our positions are opposite.
Yeah.
And one of our positions is true. The other one is completely wrong. So it's weird to move the goalpost to whether or not this card is at its best in the mirror. I will concede to you it is not at its best in the mirror. It is fundamental to why this deck had a positive win percentage against all of the other decks. They said out of the 10 other decks, it had a positive win percentage against all of them. Wow. I promise you, Fires of Invention was an important part of that whole recipe. It was very crucial.
It's really good in some matchups. Like, according to you, all of the matchups.
Yes. Some. Definitely
yeah, so
some.
If they have to cast their Copper Code Outcast on turn 5, and you're playing like the white aura deck, you usually win. If they just cheat it out with fires, you usually lose. So I guess that's strongly in support of you.
And the thing is that it's just a much stronger card than almost any card in their deck.
Well,
so
I'm just wondering,
which is maybe circular, but I mean, it is true.
Do you think that it's still, let's call it broken level, power level in that deck if Agent of Treachery is banned? I mean, they lose the entire Copper Code Outcast engine.
What is broken? I don't think that's the question. It's not about whether it's broken.
I mean, so
Standard hasn't been very fun recently, and I think that Standard will be more fun if Fires of Invention is banned versus not with all these other changes. If you just change the companion rule and ban Agent of Treachery, that's one thing. I believe that path would be more fun than what the status quo was. I think that if you change the companion rule and ban Agent of Treachery and Fires of Invention, that world is more fun than the world where Fires of Invention is not banned.
Huh. I don't know.
I think they did great on that. I think that it takes some guts to actually pull the trigger on both, and I think that they were very wise to.
All right. I can respect you're respecting their position. On the other hand, I super agree with banning Agent of Treachery. That guy is, it is so dramatically unfun.
Not only should they ban
decks.
Agent of Treachery, they should ban making more cards like that. At least not very often. Like, it gets really...
I am going to stand by. I don't think Agent of Treachery is a bad guy. The problem is Copper Code Outcast, Agent of Treachery is a bad team, and Winota, Agent of Treachery.
You're so focused on what's fair. You're just focused on what's fair. I'm talking about fun, dude. Agent of Treachery, even when it was used fair, it was just going around invalidating anybody dumb enough to play with a text box. It's like, oh, what a giant idiot. He played with a card that does anything.
I had to tell you, I was so close to beating this Winota deck the other day, and then I realized that he had 3 Agent of Treacheries in play, and then he got triggers on all 3. And I was just like, that has never happened to me before in my life, and I just conceded before he drew all of his 9 cards.
Well, yeah, Agent of Treachery, puts in some work in multiples if you hit that magic third.
I had never gotten to that position before where they were all triggering, and I was like, no fun. So here's the thing. I think I actually enjoy playing against Agent of Treachery if there's no fires, and I like trying to craft the board position around that. I do think that's fun. I think that no Winota games are fun. I think Winota games feel very random.
Okay. Well, we'll see. I bet Winota games will be a lot more fun now.
Yeah, no, they're going to be, by definition, more fun because they're all negative fun right now, and then when Winota goes to 0, by definition...
It's not going to be 0, man. I'm telling you, Winota's a sweet design.
Do you think it's a good design?
No.
Sorry. So let's
define a sweet design.
Let's define
it's definitely sweet.
Context.
It's definitely sweet. If you're gonna do some like stuff like that, you could do worse than Winota.
Like
I think you got to just. I personally don't have quite as much appetite for just continually making Aetherworks marvels. Like, some of them might turn out to be broken, some of them might not, but I think that, like, unlimited mana cheat with, like, balanced around a heavy RNG aspect isn't the... That's not what I would balance the stuff around, but I do think that Winota may have a couple really bads, but it actually has a bunch of really greats. Like, I think that the incentives in deck building for Winota, where you want both a mix of humans and non-humans, and you want to have stuff down early that's attacking, and the types of cards that it promotes you playing early, and the types of cards it promotes with you playing on top, it's like it's a novel mixture that plays out in a kind of an interesting way. I like a lot of the incentives. I don't love the payoff. I also think it's really weird, Winota, but you know, Winota is the type of design that's like it's like Donald Draper. You know, there are things to love, and some people love a lot of them, and there are things to not love as much.
Look,
and
man,
some people really hate those.
Yeah, as long as you're not married to him, I think that he's mostly pluses. Like, so
I'm not trying to edit it. I'm just trying to point to he's a polarizing figure, even among his own personality traits. You know,
I'm saying I would not want to be married to Don Draper, but I would love for Don Draper.
You identify as Don Draper, don't you?
I would love to grow. I mean, he has some. I mean, I don't ever want to have an alcohol abuse problem, right? I don't want to have that, right? Like, but there are many traits that he has where he is portrayed as the best in the world at certain things, and I think that some of those are aspirational. I would not want, any of his marriages. He had plenty to choose from that all failed. I wouldn't want to have any of those marriages. But on the other hand, he's extraordinarily handsome.
True. So, dude, they banned Agent of Treachery and Fires in Standard plus whatever the hell Historic is. Like, maybe someday that'll be a format. But
I don't know what it is either.
It's the pretend arena format that people don't want to play.
But it's also
because it's pretend.
They're only suspended, right? They're not banned, right? They're suspended.
Yeah, for now, which is the same as being banned. And if you look at some of the cards, I mean, Oko is banned. There's just no way to play with the card. But what do you think of no Agent of Treachery or Fires of Invention bans for Pioneer? Because, like, we were already seeing Agent of Treachery and Fires of Invention really sinking their fangs into Pioneer. Obviously, with Yorion nerfed, that's there's a good chance that maybe it doesn't, maybe it falls out of the limelight a little bit, but I kind of think we're going to keep seeing it, Well,
I think that preserving Agent of Treachery and Fires of Invention and Pioneer is actually a vote for format diversity, right? Like,
totally.
Pioneer is, it's not a format like Standard where, pretty clear that Yorion, Fires of Invention, Agent of Treachery was disproportionately performing in Standard, right? Like, you said that it had a winning winning matchup percentage in every matchup that was in the mirror, right? So
Right.
that's not the case in every format, right? Where you have a single deck that has that much oomph from a small number of cards. And in fact, there are oppressive fast combo decks in Pioneer, a variety of different you've got inverter decks, you've got breach decks, and then you've also got a variety of beatdown decks that are far faster and more consistent than the beatdown decks that are found in Standard, that can kind of hold a deck that's trying to actually cast 4 or 5 mana worth of spells in check, and in some cases they even they can remove a key permanent, or they can make you discard a key permanent, or they can kill you before you get your payoff off. So I think that it's not nearly as unfun in those formats when you're talking about many decks that can kill on turn 4 already. So playing a permanent on turn 4 that might lead to shenanigans on turns 5 and 6 is way less offensive.
The thing I think we got to kind of keep an eye on, though. I mean, isn't Winota plus Agent of Treachery kind of like a little scary in Pioneer?
Yeah,
because
absolutely could be.
Yeah, because I think that so some of the other humans are not too bad, right? Like obviously Agent of Treachery is the big one, but you have access to stuff like Reflector Mage, Mantis Rider, Alicia who smiles at death. Alicia who smiles at death is actually kind of interesting if you're playing a deck that has stuff like Reflector Mage and Goblin Rabblemaster, right? And Goblin Rabblemaster is pretty sweet with Winota anyway. And you still get to do the stuff like play Teferi or Chandra. And you can even, if you want, you can play some of the stuff like, what is it, like Bone Crusher Giant, Brazen Borrower. Like you can just play some really good cards to help activate it.
Yeah, you can. Obviously some of those cards are legal in the Standard version, and the chosen payoff is Agent of Treachery. My understanding is that like Winota played in Historic, for example, right now doesn't even play Agent of Treachery. That it is a powerful strategy, and it's exploiting some of the other humans. I think that's probably an interesting thing to see in Pioneer, and again, maybe that's a vote for format diversity. Yep. I think a lot of the things that you would want to do in the Pioneer Winota deck are similar to the things you'd want to do in the Standard deck, but maybe you just tone down the top of your curve for cards that you could plausibly cast, like Mantis Rider or something, and then you just have to settle for getting a huge edge on mana instead of having as high of a ceiling as you would with a 7-drop. But you're just not drawing these cards that you can never cast, right? We had a whole discussion about you can use your removal spells to move a terrible agent that you drew into the bottom of your library. That's not going to be a thing in Pioneer.
Yeah. I think it'll play. I don't know. I guess I think that the Pioneer stuff, there might be ways to get rid of your extra cards, but there's just such an incredible amount of high end that you're probably going to end up just being priced into just taking hits when you draw them, Yeah.
I mean, well,
it's not like, Winota with the 6-1 is going to still be, that's still like a powerful play, right?
Oh yeah. I mean, talk about something that's exploiting the random number generator. There's a lot of variability on that. If you get lucky, you're very lucky with that flip. So that's exciting. The thing that I think is really important to keep our eyes on is just that it's not that they can't make more changes in Pioneer, Modern, whatever other formats, right? Like it took them a long time to ban Oko in some of those formats versus in Standard, right? It took. All right, I was not even sure that they had to ban Oko in Pioneer. I really like the look of that Stompy deck, just for example. And then it took them even longer to ban it in Modern. So some of these cards that might be considered oppressive might be changed in some of these bigger formats. But I think they just had a little bit of extra fire under their feet to make changes in Standard because there's the upcoming what is it? It's like, I don't know what they call it, like Players Tour on Magic Arena that's coming up? That's...
Possibly. You'd have to ask one of the people on the secret, short list to get the information.
Oh, well. I don't know any of those people. So my understanding was there might be a players tour on Magic Arena. And don't know how I would have thought that. But, given that seems to be what's going to happen in the format of Standard, I think they wanted to square up Standard for such a showcase event.
Oh, yeah. Plus, I think Standard actually has some of the most ground to gain, not just from, a local low, but also the fact that the last few sets, it's kind of weird because, I think a lot of people get fixated on the most outlier extreme problems. There have been a lot of really dope designs recently. And I'm really excited and who knows how it'll shake out, because they cannot possibly have, all the testing and preparation of what they were doing to sculpt whatever format would exist. It's all out the window because, the companion rules being so completely different, and then obviously Fires and Agent being banned, it's just such a different game than what they were testing before. So it might end up shaking out to be a weird, it might not be as good as it could be, but it might also be amazing because there's a lot of dope designs, and I'm really looking forward to experimenting with all that stuff. And I think this is a really positive step in the right direction.
I agree with a lot of your sentiment there. And in fact, I'm kind of torn because as much as I was perceiving some kind of structural oppression coming from the companions, which, obviously they changed the entire rule around it. And as much as I disliked playing against certain Agent of Treachery decks, I loved that there was such identity in some of these Standard decks, that just had never existed before. That
I think there still will be.
There was just I hate playing against the Winota deck, but I would have loved being the person who designed that deck, right? The
problem is that they work in R&D.
Yeah. Wow.
So you never get to be the player doing it.
Yeah, it's such a cool design, right? And I'm oh wow, that's all these cards fit together so beautifully, and you just have to sacrifice a little bit of life total from your mana base, but then you're going off, and there's all these cool cards that just don't see play anywhere else, and they actually make they're not terrible.
You talked yourself into playing Aetherworks Marvel. I don't know, man.
I did play Aetherworks Marvel when I shouldn't have. That's a true story.
All right, dude. Well, it does seem like we're in for a wild upheaval in every format. I'm excited to see how the weeks to come shape up.
Yeah, same. All right.
All right. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to fight